What happened at Dandadan? The series was supposed to be dead on sight, and now it's one of the most popular mainstream anime, and it's one of the 5 most popular Shonen Jump manga. This wasn't without its problems. Dandadan was leaked before it was released on Netflix, and there was a ton of drama surrounding the fandom. And yet, it's still insanely popular, and everyone is dying to see season 2. Which begs the question, why is Dandadan so controversial, and how has it remained one of the most adored series in anime? So as someone who's been reading Dandadan since the beginning, I'd like to briefly go over the history of the manga, honestly discuss the shocking transition that took place once the anime came out, and explain why Dandadan's position as a weird manga makes it a timeless classic. Just be warned that there may be some spoilers. So first, let's talk about why Dandadan is so weird, or rather, why people think it's so weird. Because this was a big part of the drama last year, and a lot of it stemmed from people not even agreeing about what makes the story weird. So it's only fair that we understand that before we look at all the drama that came afterward. So Dandadan started in April of 2021 on Jump Plus. If you know anything about Jump Plus, that's where Jump likes to release its more graphic manga. That's not the only reason. Another benefit is artists can upload chapters at their own pace, but because it's for older readers, Jump Plus manga tend to be more graphic. Anyway, Dandadan started in 2021. Now, I did not start the manga right away. It was 2021, so I was too busy with Dr. Stone. But I noticed people saying how insane the art was, and how the story was basically about balls. In fact, Dandadan wasn't talked about as much as series like My Hero or Black Clover, but there were always 2 things that would make it go viral for a bit. Whenever there was a really cool double spread, or whenever there was a weird sexual scene. It's this second part that kind of put people off, which is completely understandable. First of all, the first chapter features Momo stripped down and about to be probed by aliens, which is definitely an uncomfortable scene. We'll talk about this more when we get to the anime drama, but just remember that for later. Anyway, there's a bunch of scenes after the first chapter that feature a lot of nudity. For example, there's another scene towards the end of season 1 where Momo is in a hot spring, but she's attacked by some of the villains. There's another scene earlier in the story where nobody's even being attacked, and it's not that uncomfortable, but the characters are shown naked together. So you can imagine why some people might not want to check out Dandadan. The story is always mentioning Okarune's balls, so that's a thing. And there's a certain level of nudity in the story that can either feel awkward, uncomfortable, or even just unnecessary. And that was more or less the extent of Dandadan's influence in the community for a year or so. It did gain a decent audience because the creator Yukinobu Tatsu worked for Fujimoto on Chainsaw Man, and because of the ball jokes. But it never blew up or anything like that. Fast forward a year later, and I finally decided to try out the manga. At the time, the Evil Eye arc was just finishing up. This is the upcoming arc in season 2, and it's basically Dandadan's first major arc. I won't get into spoilers, but this arc took everything fans loved about the series and put it together, namely the weird powers, the action, and the romance. I managed to catch up right as this arc was ending, and I loved every second. So I started the manga just in time for the next arc, which is referred to as the Kaiju arc. This is the precursor to one of the series' best arcs, the Space Globalists arc. At this point, Dandadan had reached its first peak in the community, as new fans like myself were checking out the manga after the hype from the previous arc, and old fans were excited since the story was ramping up like crazy. But for the next couple of years, Dandadan kind of hit a wall. The story just got better and better and fans were eating it up, but the manga had been around for a couple of years by now. Any controversy was kind of old news, and like any long-running series, the manga sales kind of plateaued. In fact, they even hit a bit of a decline at this time, and in my own experience, this plateau was felt on YouTube as well. Plenty of people did chapter reviews with no big success, and even the biggest channels struggled to get a really big Dandadan video. The series was just too niche, but obviously that would change in the following year. Now, before I get into that, make sure to join the channel if you're enjoying the video. You get custom badges and emojis to show off during our weekly live streams, and you can pick which series I cover next. Anyway, Dandadan had been around for a while, and people were starting to doubt if they would ever get an anime. This is when Science Saru stepped in and announced they would be adapting the manga. The announcement was in early 2024, so we had to wait almost a whole year. Fans were excited to finally see their favorite manga finally animated, but there was talk of how this would affect the community. Naturally, if an anime gets really big, it usually translates to new manga fans. It happened to Demon Slayer, and it happened to Jujutsu Kaisen. But sometimes, even when the anime gets popular, it doesn't impact the manga. This was the case with Chainsaw Man, which despite its anime, didn't really have a big impact on the manga and its fandom. So especially considering Chainsaw Man was like the big brother to Dandadan, a lot of people felt like that would happen for the Dandadan anime as well. People were excited, but a lot of fans tempered their expectations. To make matters worse, Dandadan would fall victim to one of Netflix's biggest leaks in years. Essentially, someone leaked a bunch of Netflix's animated shows for the upcoming season. So like a month before the anime had even come out, you could basically watch the entire season for free. Now fans were worried that the anime had no chance and that nobody was actually going to watch it on Netflix. Science Saru had released the first 2 or 3 episodes in the form of a movie, but that didn't seem to have any major impact. Fortunately, what came next was a pleasant surprise. Dandadan finally released its first episode, and not only was it popular, it was one of the most watched shows on Netflix. It was actually breaking a ton of records. So after the first few episodes, Dandadan had grown from that one weird manga to the single most talked about anime on the internet. Obviously, this brought a lot of good publicity, as the manga sales exploded. But as you know, this also brought a lot of bad publicity. And this is where I really need to be careful, because when we get into the drama, there's a lot of he said, she said. So let's start with that scene with Momo we mentioned before. Naturally, this was going to start some controversy, since it had already happened with manga readers. It's an uncomfortable scene, so it was to be expected. But what made things crazy was when Chibi Reviews, one of the biggest names in the community, posted a clip of the scene and captioned it with, "The animators didn't need to go so hard for this scene." And here's why that's a problem. On the one hand, Science Saru actually animated the scene pretty well, but it wasn't so good to warrant that kind of praise. On the other hand, this was already an uncomfortable scene to watch, so to have one of the biggest names in YouTube basically say, "Wow, look how good this scene looks," was kind of just tone deaf. Like, as an anime and manga YouTuber, you should at least be vaguely aware of what people are already saying about a series. So especially because you're in that position, and because it's such an awkward scene, the whole thing was just weird. Now, I'm not Chibi Reviews, so I can't say what his motivations were at the time beyond praising the show and getting some likes, but regardless of his intent, his tweet was a major source of drama. People were not only pissed because, whether intentionally or not, his tweet was incredibly insensitive to the people that saw this scene and felt uncomfortable, but also because he, as a big YouTuber, just made anime fans look like weirdos. This led to a huge battle where people actually doxed Chibi Reviews, and for some reason, he blamed it on both Dandadan fans and Boruto fans. Essentially, the whole thing brought completely unnecessary and avoidable drama towards Dandadan, and true fans of the manga were worried that this was the end. This would only get worse later in the season, when this artist would post their own drawing of Okarun and Momo, and half the internet felt the need to say they weren't allowed to do that because they were ruining the characters. Another instance where Dandadan generated an embarrassing debate and generated a ton of negative publicity. Now Dandadan was at a really weird point. The anime was still doing crazy numbers on Netflix, and people were going crazy over the new episodes. New fans loved the romance between Okarun and Momo, and they loved the emotional backstories. At the same time, people were fighting each other over debates that really had nothing to do with the actual story. So what was the end result? Well, Dandadan wrapped up after one core, announcing that it would return this July. And after the end of Core 1, everyone was really excited for the second core. before, or season 2 or whatever we're calling it now. Despite all the drama, despite all the weirdos, despite the unprecedented leaks, Dandadan broke all kinds of records, and now more people were reading the manga than ever before. The show was so popular that even months after season 1, it was still one of the most watched shows on the internet. So you're probably wondering how Dandadan did so well despite all of these crazy issues, and the answer is that there really is no answer. One theory is that the leaks had the opposite effect and actually got people more excited for the show. Another theory is that negative publicity is good publicity. So all the drama got more eyes on Dandadan, which translated to record-breaking views. But my theory is that Dandadan is just that good. The reason it got so popular is because people really liked the story and the animation of Science Saru. The manga was never that popular prior to the anime, but 1, anime is always more mainstream, and 2, Dandadan is a Jump Plus series, so it doesn't have as many eyes on it as a weekly Shonen Jump series like Jujutsu Kaisen. But once you put it on one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world, everyone was gonna watch it. And as someone who's been reading the manga forever and has been making Dandadan videos for a while, I know exactly why people like the anime so much. Obviously, the action is a big part of it. Dandadan does all of the usual shonen things like transformations and crazy powers. Another part of it is the animation of Science Saru, which is always a game changer. But the same can be said for a lot of Shonen Jump series like Chainsaw Man. But what makes Dandadan stand out is the romance between Okarun and Momo. With a series like Chainsaw Man, there is romantic tension, but it's the kind of romance where you need a leash and chew toys. Maybe I'm just an old man, but I wouldn't exactly call that mainstream. But Dandadan, despite all of its weirdness, is honestly really wholesome. Momo is like the girl next door and Okarun has unspoken riz. So they have a really cute dynamic where they become friends and slowly fall in love with each other even though they're both shy. Like Okarun is a dumb boy and doesn't pick up on it. And Momo is shy too, so she does things like telling Okarun to say bye when he leaves. It's a surprisingly wholesome dynamic in a series about aliens, monsters, and balls, and it's why the series has so much mainstream appeal. You have all the ball jokes for the meatheads, and you have the wholesome scenes for everyone else. It's funny because I made a video on this a while back, and you can see how much people ate these characters up. In fact, a lot of people actually related to these characters. I specifically remember one girl commenting that she was Momo in school, and she was interested in a nerdy guy just like Okarun. Clearly, this chemistry spoke to people on a massive level, so it's only natural that people would watch Dandadan for the romance and the action. So when you have both of these things, it only makes sense that Dandadan would become a global phenomenon. Which brings us to the present. In other words, what impact did all of this craziness have on the series as a whole? Well, now season 2 is coming up and everyone is excited for that. Dandadan has been one of the most talked about anime for months, and there's no reason to expect this to change when we finally get season 2. And like I said, the manga is still going strong as one of Shueisha's 5 biggest manga online. The manga sales got a big boost, and it seems like there's more people keeping up with new chapters than ever before. So despite all the craziness, the anime couldn't have had a better impact. Dandadan broke all kinds of records and manga fans couldn't be happier. But that just leaves 2 questions. 1, what will happen when season 2 comes out? And 2, is it worth it catching up to the manga? So let's start with the anime. I've already talked about why everyone loves season 1. And season 2 is going to be the same. There's even more action, there's even more transformations, and the dynamic between Momo and Okarun reaches a new level. Plus, they'll likely start the kaiju arc where the story really starts to pick up and we meet even more great characters. So if you loved season 1 or you were even remotely interested, you really need to catch up and watch season 2 every week. As far as the manga goes, it's honestly one of, if not the single best ongoing manga. Obviously, I'm biased because I've been reading Dandadan for a while, but as someone who keeps up with as much manga as I can, I really think it's between Dandadan, One Piece, Gachi Akuta, and a few others. And there's a few reasons Dandadan stands out as a must-read manga. First of all, so many manga crash and burn, but Tatsu draws with an insane level of detail on a weekly schedule while taking very few breaks. It's one of the best runs of art in manga, so you're kind of missing out if you're not reading the new chapters. On top of that, the plot of Dandadan just gets better and better. When the manga starts, there really isn't a plot. It's kind of just about Okarune's balls. But by the time you hit season 2, you get to this big war between the aliens and the humans and ghosts on Earth. And even after this Avengers level war, there's still a big bad that hasn't even made his move yet. At this point, it's like the more we find out about him, the more we realize we don't know anything. Plus, there's all kinds of crazy plot twists and conspiracies. There's also Koki, who is low-key my favorite character and must be protected at all costs. Speaking of characters, as you can see in the anime, Dandadan has one of the best casts in manga. In fiction, ever really. It starts with Okarune and Momo, and now we're at a point where there's like a dozen characters in the main cast, and they're all my favorite character, especially Koki. If nothing else, just hear me out. I had someone in one of my streams say they loved season 1, but they couldn't get into the manga, which is a fairly common problem with any series. So I recommended that they start the manga all the way from chapter 1, and I personally guaranteed that they would be in love with the manga by volume 4. And believe it or not, they came back to another stream and told me they were in love with the manga. So even if that's just one example, I mean it when I say Dandadan is one of the best ongoing manga, and you owe it to yourself to join the community and follow this story to the very end. Like I said before, Dandadan fans are some of the luckiest fans right now because the manga is impossibly good and we're all looking forward to season 2. It came with its weird struggles and nobody really saw it coming, but Dandadan rightfully deserves its spot as one of the most popular series in anime and manga. The story is very bizarre between all the alien monsters and ball powers, but it's that bizarre nature that makes Dandadan timeless. It's by no means a perfect story, and it's got its fair share of flaws, but when it comes to perfect stories, it's about as close as anyone will ever see. But maybe I'm wrong. How would you describe Dandadan? How does it compare to other series? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And don't forget to become a channel member. You'll get custom badges and emojis, you can pick which series I cover next, and you can even get credited in future videos. Also check out my other Dandadan videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.